$12. Cowboy bought a horse, but the chief sent his 2 daughters as part of the deal. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Jack was a simple cowboy, living a quiet life on his ranch in the Wild West. His days consisted of cattle herding and maintaining his homestead, all alone since his wife passed away years ago. With no family nearby and only a few ranch hands to help him out, Jack spent most of his time working hard to keep his land running. He had always dreamed of owning a strong horse to help him with his daily chores, but the problem was, he didn't have the money. One day, word spread throughout the nearby town about a horse up for sale at an unbelievably low price of $12. Jack had barely enough money to scrape by, but the opportunity seemed too good to pass up. The horse was being sold by an old man who lived near a small Apache tribe. Jack knew the area well, and the thought of owning a horse for such a price seemed like a dream. The following day, Jack saddled up his old mule and headed out to the nearby town, hoping to strike a deal. When Jack arrived at the auction site, the old man greeted him with a nod and led him to the corral where the horse was kept. The horse was strong, its coat a deep brown, and its muscles rippled under the sun. Jack could tell it was a fine animal, but there was something odd about the deal. The old man told him that the horse was worth much more, but since Jack had made the long journey, he could take it for only $12. Jack, suspicious but eager to own the horse, handed over the money, not realizing that he was about to enter a deal far more complex than he imagined. The old man didn't stop there. As they finished the transaction, he said, "This horse comes with a price." Jack looked confused, unsure of what the man meant. "What do you mean?" he asked. The old man simply smiled and pointed to 2 young women standing nearby, watching the exchange. "These 2 daughters of mine will come with the horse. It's part of the deal. They will help you on your ranch." Jack's eyes widened. He had heard rumors of the Apache people's customs, but he wasn't prepared for this. The old man explained that his daughters, although unfamiliar with the ways of white settlers, were capable workers and could help Jack manage the land. Jack stood there, dumbfounded, trying to make sense of it all. He had only come to buy a horse, but now, he found himself in a far more complicated situation. 2 Apache women, who had been raised in a completely different world, were to live with him on his ranch. Jack was unsure whether to accept the deal or walk away, but the need for a horse and the promise of assistance weighed heavily on his mind. The old man handed Jack the reins of the horse, and as he did, he motioned for the 2 women to approach. The taller one, with long dark hair and strong features, stepped forward first. Her eyes were steady, her expression unreadable. The second woman, shorter and more delicate, held herself with quiet dignity. Jack didn't know how to feel. He had never thought much about the Apache people, only ever hearing stories of their bravery and strength. But now, standing before him, were 2 women who would change his life forever. As Jack led the horse toward his ranch, the 2 women followed him, silent and cautious. Jack couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. He had bought a horse, but it was clear that this deal was far from simple. With each step, he felt the weight of the old man's words settling in, and he knew that his life on the ranch would never be the same again. The sun was beginning to set as Jack made his way back to his ranch, the weight of the reins in his hands now feeling heavier with each step. The 2 Apache women followed quietly behind him, their presence a strange contrast to the usual solitude he had enjoyed for so many years. As they walked, the horse he had just purchased moved gracefully beside him, its powerful muscles rippling under the setting sun. Jack kept his focus ahead, unsure of what to make of the deal he had struck. He had bought a horse for $12, but the real cost was yet to be revealed. As they arrived at the ranch, the familiar sight of his barn and fields stretching out before him did little to calm his nerves. This was no longer just his place. Now, with the 2 women here, everything felt different. The taller woman, who had not spoken since they left the market, paused at the edge of the yard. Jack glanced back at her, noticing the way she stood, scanning the land with the eyes of someone accustomed to the wild, someone who had been born with a sense of responsibility to the land. "We can help," she finally said, her voice low but steady. Jack nodded, unsure of how to respond. He had never been good at reading people, especially not ones as quiet and reserved as these two. The shorter woman, with her gentle demeanor, had not said a word since they arrived. Jack could only assume that she was waiting for something, perhaps permission to settle in or maybe just a sign that she could start helping. All right, Jack said, forcing himself to speak. Let's get you settled in the barn for the night. I'll get some food ready after that. He led them to the barn, where they would spend their first night. The two women didn't seem to mind the rustic conditions of the old building. They set down their small bundles of belongings and immediately began to make themselves useful, gathering some hay for bedding and securing the horses in the stable. Jack watched them for a while, unsure of what to do next. He had always been a man of action, but this situation required a different kind of approach, one he was not sure he was ready for. That night, as Jack sat down to a simple meal of beans and bread, the two women joined him in the small kitchen. The silence between them felt thick, but it was not uncomfortable. It was as if they were all waiting for something to happen, a shift in the air that would make sense of the strange circumstances they now found themselves in. As the meal progressed, Jack tried to ask questions to understand why the old man had insisted on sending his daughters with the horse. Why me? Jack asked, his voice quiet but probing. Why did he send you here? The tall woman looked at him, her eyes steady. It was part of the deal, she said simply. The horse was never just a horse. Our father had a plan. Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. The old man had known more than he let on. The deal was not just about a horse. It was a promise, a bond, something much bigger than a simple exchange of goods. What kind of plan? Jack asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. The woman remained silent for a moment, then spoke again. It's not something we can explain right now, but you'll understand in time. Jack sat back in his chair, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. He had thought he understood the world, hard work, a fair deal, and a life lived in simplicity. But now, with these two women in his home, he was starting to realize that there was more to the world than he had ever imagined. As the night wore on, Jack felt the quiet hum of anticipation in the air. He could sense that something was about to change, but he had no idea what. All he knew was that his life, the life he had worked so hard to build, was no longer just his own. The next morning, Jack awoke early, as he always did, to find the two women already up and working. They had already set out to tend to the animals, their movements practiced and efficient. Jack watched them for a moment, feeling a strange sense of gratitude. These women, despite the mystery surrounding their arrival, were making his life easier. They were working hard, and they seemed to know what they were doing. As Jack stepped outside to join them, he noticed something in the distance, a rider on horseback, approaching his ranch. The figure was tall, dressed in the distinctive garb of an Apache warrior. Jack felt a strange sense of unease wash over him. Who was this rider? Was it someone from the tribe? And what did they want? As the rider drew closer, Jack realized that this was not just any Apache warrior. This was someone who had a purpose, and Jack could feel the weight of that purpose bearing down on him. The rider's face was covered by a scarf, but his eyes were visible, piercing through the dust of the morning. He stopped just short of the barn and looked at Jack, his gaze intense and unwavering. I need to speak with you, the rider said, his voice low but firm. Jack felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew that whatever this man had to say, it was not going to be good news. The rider dismounted slowly, his horse standing still in the dusty morning light. Jack felt a mix of unease and curiosity as he watched the man approach. The tall figure moved with purpose, his eyes locked on Jack. There was something about him, something that felt different from the other men Jack had encountered in his years out here. The rider's face was partially covered by a scarf, but his eyes burned through the fabric, sharp and intense. Jack took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. I need to speak with you, the rider said, his voice low and steady. About what? Jack replied, his hand resting on the handle of his rifle. He wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever this man had to say. The rider didn't seem fazed by the tension in the air. He looked Jack over for a moment, then spoke again. Your new companions, he said, his tone flat. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had a feeling this was going to be no ordinary conversation. What about them? Jack asked, his voice steady, though he could feel the unease creeping into his chest. The rider took a step closer, his gaze never leaving Jack's. "They are not just two random women," he said, the words heavy with meaning. "They have a purpose here, and so do you." Jack frowned, confusion clouding his mind. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, though the knot in his stomach was tightening. The rider continued, his voice calm but urgent. "You've been chosen, Jack. You're a part of something bigger than this ranch, bigger than what you've been led to believe." Jack didn't know how to respond. He had come to terms with his simple life as a cowboy, the solitude that came with it. But now, with the two Apache women in his home and the appearance of this mysterious rider, things were shifting in ways he couldn't control. The rider paused for a moment, as if waiting for Jack to process the weight of his words. Then he spoke again, his voice quieter, almost as if it were a secret meant only for Jack. "The two women you took in are more than just daughters of an old man. They're part of a prophecy, Jack. A prophecy that involves you." Jack stared at the rider, his mind racing. A prophecy? What was this man talking about? He looked over at the two women, who were now standing in the barn doorway, watching the exchange with quiet curiosity. They didn't speak, but Jack could feel the weight of their presence. They knew something he didn't, and it was starting to make his head spin. "Why me?" Jack finally asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "What do I have to do with this?" The rider's eyes softened for a moment, and he stepped closer. "You don't have to understand everything right now. But know this, Jack, you are not just a cowboy. You're tied to something much older, much more powerful than you realize. And whether you like it or not, you're going to be a part of it." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. He took a step back, unsure of how to process what was being said. "I'm just a rancher," he muttered under his breath. The rider shook his head slowly. "You were a rancher, yes. But now, you're part of a bigger story, one that will shape everything to come." Jack didn't know what to make of it. He had lived a simple life, focused on hard work and survival, never asking for much more. But now, with these two women and this rider standing in front of him, he realized that his life was about to take a turn he could never have anticipated. "So what do you want from me?" Jack asked, his voice weary. "What is it you're trying to say?" The rider looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I'm here to warn you. There are forces at play, forces that want to use you, to manipulate you into something you're not ready for. But you have the power to change that. You can choose to walk away from this, or you can choose to embrace it. But you must decide soon." Jack felt a cold chill run down his spine. The weight of the rider's words hung heavy in the air, and Jack didn't know what to think. He had come here for a simple life. But now, it seemed that the world had more in store for him than he could ever have imagined. The rider turned and began to walk back toward his horse, his steps purposeful. "Remember, Jack," he called over his shoulder, "your choices will determine the outcome. The story is yours to write." Jack stood there for a long moment, watching the rider disappear into the distance. The sun had fully risen now, casting long shadows across the land. Jack was left with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. His life was no longer just his own. Jack stood in the yard long after the rider had left, the weight of the man's words hanging in the air like an unshakable fog. The rider had told him he was part of something much larger than just being a simple rancher. Jack had always prided himself on the quiet, hard life he had built for himself. But now, it felt like that life was slipping through his fingers, slipping into a world of mystery and forces he had never asked for. He looked over at the two Apache women standing by the barn, their eyes watching him closely. They hadn't said much, but Jack could sense they were waiting for something to happen, just like him. He walked toward them slowly, unsure of what to say or do next. The tall woman, the one with the strong features, stepped forward first. Her eyes were still as steady as before, but this time, there was something different in them. It was as though she had been waiting for Jack to come to this conclusion. "You know what the rider said is true," she said softly. Jack stopped in his tracks. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice thick with uncertainty. She looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing her words carefully. "You're part of something bigger. Our father saw it, and so did the rider. This ranch, this place, it's more than just land. It's where things will change, where it begins." Jack didn't know what to say. He had always thought of his ranch as his sanctuary, his escape from the world, but now it felt like a prison that was closing in around him. The shorter woman, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward as well. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. The same pouch that Jack had seen earlier, the one that had caught his eye. She handed it to him, and for a moment, he hesitated, but then took it. The pouch felt strangely heavy in his hands, its contents a mystery. Inside this pouch is the key to everything, the shorter woman said, her voice soft but firm. Our father entrusted it to us, and now, it's yours to protect. Jack opened the pouch slowly, revealing a small, intricately carved stone. It was smooth to the touch, with symbols etched into its surface, symbols that Jack couldn't understand. The moment he touched it, a strange feeling washed over him, a sense of connection to something ancient and powerful. His heart raced. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The tall woman stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his face. "That stone is more than just a piece of art. It's a symbol of the bond between your people and ours. It's a symbol of the prophecy that the writer spoke of." Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. "Prophecy?" he echoed, still struggling to understand. "What do you mean?" The shorter woman's eyes softened. "You have a part to play in this, Jack. You have a role to fulfill. Our father knew this, and now, it's time for you to understand." Jack didn't know what to say. His mind was spinning, his thoughts racing. He had come here for a simple life, for peace and solitude. But now, it felt like that life had been taken from him. "I don't understand," Jack said, shaking his head. "What am I supposed to do with this? What does it mean?" The tall woman placed a hand on his shoulder. "The stone will guide you," she said gently. "You just have to trust it. Trust that you were meant for something more." Jack stood there, holding the stone in his hand, feeling its weight pressing down on him. He looked out at the land, his land, and for the first time, it felt like it was no longer just his. It felt like it was a part of something much larger, something that was now his responsibility to protect. But what did that mean? What was he supposed to do? The writer's words echoed in his mind. "Your choices will determine the outcome. The story is yours to write." Jack's grip on the stone tightened. For the first time, he realized that the life he had built, the life he had worked so hard for, was only the beginning. A new chapter was about to unfold, one that he could never have imagined. And it was up to him to decide how the story would end. The days following the writer's visit passed in a blur for Jack. The stone, now safely tucked away in his pocket, felt heavier with every passing moment. It had been almost a week since the writer's cryptic warning, and Jack's sense of unease was growing. He had tried to return to his daily routine, feeding the horses, repairing the fence, and tending to the cattle, but it all felt different now. He couldn't shake the feeling that his life was spiraling out of control, and no matter what he did, he was being pulled deeper into something he didn't understand. One morning, as Jack sat on the porch drinking his coffee, he saw the two Apache women working in the fields, their movements graceful and efficient. The taller woman, who had become more of a presence than Jack had anticipated, paused and looked up at him. Her eyes met his, and for the first time since their arrival, Jack saw something different in them. It was a flicker of understanding, as if she had been waiting for him to finally acknowledge what was happening around them. "You are part of this now," she said, her voice calm but firm. Jack stood up, feeling the weight of her words. He walked toward her, his boots crunching on the dry earth beneath him. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low. "You know what I mean," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "The stone, the prophecy, the role you are meant to play. It's all tied to this place, Jack." Jack felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He hadn't wanted to believe it, hadn't wanted to accept that his life was no longer just his own. But with every passing day, it became harder to deny the truth. He had been swept up in something much larger than himself. "I didn't ask for any of this," Jack said, frustration rising in his chest. "I just wanted to live a simple life, run my ranch." The woman remained silent for a moment, then spoke again, her voice softer this time. "Sometimes, Jack, the life we want isn't the one we're meant to have." Jack was about to respond when he heard the sound of hooves in the distance. He turned, instinctively reaching for the rifle slung over his shoulder, but stopped when he saw the rider. It was the same man who had come to warn him, the rider who had spoken of prophecy and fate. Jack's heart raced as the rider rode toward him, his face set with determination. The man dismounted with practiced ease and approached Jack. "We need to talk," the rider said, his tone urgent. "It's time you understood the full picture." Jack frowned, his hand still resting on the rifle. "What do you mean?" The rider glanced at the two women, who had stopped working and were now watching the exchange with quiet attention. "They've been waiting for you to understand," the rider said, his voice lowering. "But now it's time. The forces that are coming for you, for all of us, are already in motion." Jack's mind raced. Forces? Coming for him? He couldn't make sense of the words, but the urgency in the rider's voice made him realize that whatever was happening, it was far more dangerous than he had thought. The rider continued, "The stone you carry, the women you've taken in, they are all part of something much larger. There are others who want that stone, Jack. Others who will stop at nothing to get it." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He had thought the stone was just a piece of ancient history, something that didn't matter. But now, it seemed it was the key to something far darker. "What do they want with it?" Jack asked, his voice thick with unease. The rider shook his head. "That's not for you to know just yet. But I'll tell you this. You are the only one who can stop it from falling into the wrong hands." Jack looked down at the stone in his pocket, the weight of it pressing against him. "I don't know if I can do this," he said quietly, his voice laced with doubt. "I've never been a hero." The rider placed a hand on Jack's shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. "You don't have to be a hero, Jack. You just have to be willing to fight for what's right. And you're already doing that by standing here." Jack took a deep breath, his mind swirling with questions and doubts. But one thing was certain, he couldn't turn back now. He had already made his choice, whether he understood it or not. The rider mounted his horse again and looked down at Jack. "It's time," he said. "The forces are already moving. You need to prepare." Jack nodded, though his heart was heavy with uncertainty. The rider turned his horse and began to ride off, his figure quickly disappearing into the distance. Jack stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty horizon. The world around him felt different, and he knew deep down that his life, as he knew it, had changed forever. The days after the rider's departure felt longer than they really were. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that everything was shifting, that the world around him was slowly turning in ways he wasn't prepared for. He spent hours in the fields, working harder than ever to keep his mind occupied. But it was no use. Every time he looked up, the thought of the prophecy, the stone, and the forces that were coming for him crept back into his mind. It wasn't just a matter of physical labor anymore. Jack was caught in something much larger, something he couldn't control. The tall Apache woman had been right all along. He wasn't just a rancher anymore. But what did it all mean? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack was standing at the edge of the property when he saw them coming. Riders, dozens of them. They appeared in the distance, moving fast, their horses kicking up dust. His heart pounded as he realized they weren't the usual ranchers or travelers he had grown accustomed to. These riders moved like warriors, with purpose, and their formation was tight, organized. Jack's first instinct was to grab his rifle, but something told him not to. The two Apache women had been silent for most of the day, but now they approached him, their faces calm yet alert. "They're here," the tall woman said, her voice steady. Jack turned to her, his eyes wide. "Who are they?" "The warriors from our tribe," she replied. "They've come to protect you. You've made your choice, Jack. It's time to stand with us." Jack swallowed hard. He didn't know if he was ready for this. He had spent his whole life avoiding conflict, living a quiet existence. But now, with these warriors approaching, he realized that his past decisions had led him here. He wasn't the man he used to be. The riders reached the edge of the property, and the tall woman stepped forward to meet them. Jack watched from a distance, his heart racing. He couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. These warriors were not like any men he had ever seen. They were strong, their movements sharp and purposeful. The tall woman spoke to the leader in their native language, and Jack couldn't understand the words, but he could see the respect in their eyes as they spoke. When the conversation was over, the leader of the warriors approached Jack. He was a tall, imposing figure, his face weathered and scarred, but his eyes were filled with wisdom. "You have made the right choice," he said, his voice low and powerful. Jack nodded, though his throat was tight with uncertainty. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Jack admitted. "I've spent my whole life trying to avoid conflict." The leader of the warriors studied him for a moment, then spoke again. "Sometimes, the right choice is the hardest one to make. But you are not alone in this. We are with you." The tall woman joined them, her presence a quiet reassurance. "You have the strength inside you, Jack," she said softly. "Now, you just have to trust it." Jack felt the weight of her words settle in. He wasn't sure if he believed it yet, but he knew one thing for certain. His life would never be the same again. He had chosen to stand with them, to stand with the Apache, and now there was no turning back. The leader of the warriors nodded once, signaling for his men to dismount and set up camp. "We stay here tonight," he said. "Tomorrow, we move out. There are many who would see the stone in your hands for their own gain. But we will keep it safe, Jack. We will protect you." Jack watched as the warriors set up camp, their movements practiced and efficient. He felt the weight of the stone in his pocket, the object that had started it all, and a sense of responsibility grew inside him. He wasn't just a rancher anymore. He was part of something much bigger than himself. That night, as Jack lay awake in his cabin, he couldn't help but think about everything that had led him here. He had been thrust into a world of prophecy, danger, and ancient forces, and now, with the warriors at his side, he knew he had to make a choice. He had to decide what kind of man he was going to be. Was he going to embrace this new life, this new destiny, or was he going to fight it? The answer seemed obvious, but the weight of it all felt overwhelming. He rolled over in bed, staring at the ceiling. The sound of the wind outside his cabin was the only thing that filled the silence. His heart raced as he thought about the journey ahead, the challenges he would face, and the people who would come after him. But for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of clarity. He wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. The next morning, the sun rose early, casting its light over the land. Jack got to his feet and walked outside, his boots crunching on the dirt. He was ready now, ready to face whatever came next. The warriors were already preparing to move out, their horses ready, and their eyes focused. Jack joined them, the weight of the stone in his pocket still heavy, but now, it felt like part of him. He was no longer just a man on a ranch. He was part of something much bigger, and he was ready to fight for it. The morning was cool and crisp, with a faint mist rising from the ground as Jack and the warriors began their trek across the land. The stone still weighed heavily in his pocket, but with every step, Jack felt more determined. They were heading toward the heart of Apache territory, a place Jack had only heard about in stories, the kind of place where legends were born and prophecies fulfilled. The warriors moved with purpose, their horses steady and sure beneath them. The two Apache women were among them, as calm and composed as ever, their eyes always scanning the horizon. Jack couldn't help but notice the quiet confidence in their movements. They weren't just here to help. They were here because they knew something he didn't, and Jack was beginning to realize how little he understood about the world he had found himself in. The leader of the warriors, the man who had spoken to Jack when they first arrived, rode alongside him, his face stern but not unkind. "You've made the right decision, Jack," the leader said, his voice steady. Jack nodded, not sure how to respond. The weight of the stone in his pocket seemed to grow with every mile they traveled, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that everything was leading to something he couldn't predict. They rode through dense forests and across open plains, the landscape stretching out before them in a way that felt both familiar and foreign. Jack had spent most of his life on this land, but now, as they rode deeper into the heart of the Apache world, it felt like everything was changing. The world he knew was slipping away, replaced by something far older, far more powerful. After several days of travel, they finally arrived at a large clearing. Jack could feel the tension in the air as the warriors dismounted, their eyes scanning the area. The tall woman, who had been quiet for most of the journey, spoke up. "This is where it begins." Jack turned to her, confused. "What do you mean?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately, but instead looked out over the clearing. Jack followed her gaze and saw a series of rock formations in the distance. The stones were large and jagged, standing tall against the sky. They had an ancient, almost mystical quality to them. The woman spoke again, her voice calm but filled with an undeniable urgency. "These stones are sacred. They mark the place where the prophecy will unfold. This is where you will face the choice that will define everything." Jack felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had heard the writers speak of prophecies, of choices, but now, standing here in this sacred place, it all felt too real. The warriors began to form a circle around the clearing, their faces set with determination. Jack knew that this was it, the moment he had been dreading. "What choice?" Jack asked, his voice thick with uncertainty. The tall woman turned to him, her eyes serious. You will have to choose between two paths, she said, her words slow and deliberate. One will lead to peace, the other to war. One will protect your future, the other will destroy it. Jack swallowed hard. The weight of her words settled in his chest. He had never been a man who liked conflict. He had always tried to avoid it, to keep things simple and peaceful. But now, it seemed the choice wasn't his to make. The rider had been right all along. His life was no longer his own. It was tied to something bigger, something that would change everything. As the warriors prepared for what was to come, Jack felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He was ready to face it. The warriors gathered around the stones, their chants rising in the air, filling the clearing with an ancient energy. Jack stepped forward, his heart racing, and placed his hand on one of the stones. The moment his fingers touched the surface, a surge of energy shot through him, and his mind was flooded with visions. Visions of battles fought and won, of peace and destruction, of a future that was still yet to be decided. For a brief moment, Jack felt as if he were no longer in control of his own body. He was merely a vessel for the prophecy, a man caught between two worlds. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, and Jack was left standing there, his hand still resting on the stone. The tall woman stepped forward, her eyes filled with understanding. "The time has come," she said, her voice low. "Make your choice, Jack. The future is yours to shape." Jack stood there, his heart pounding in his chest, as he faced the greatest decision of his life. The prophecy, the stone, the warriors, everything had led him to this moment. And he knew that whatever choice he made, it would change everything. There was no going back now. The warriors stood still, their eyes locked on the stone that Jack had touched. The air around them seemed to hum with an energy that made the hairs on the back of Jack's neck stand up. He felt it too. The weight of the moment, the power of the prophecy hanging heavy in the air. The tall woman stepped forward, her eyes not leaving the stone. "It is time," she said, her voice steady and firm. Jack's heart was racing. He still wasn't sure what his choice meant, but it was clear that this was the moment that would shape everything. The weight of the stone in his pocket seemed to grow with each passing second, as if it were pulling him toward an inevitable fate. He could feel the eyes of the warriors on him, their expectations silent but pressing. The tall woman turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "You must decide now, Jack," she said, her voice carrying the gravity of the moment. Jack swallowed hard, his mind racing. What did the future hold? What was the right choice? Peace? War? He could feel the pulse of the land beneath him, the pulse of the warriors, the pulse of the stone, and he knew. He knew that this choice was his, and his alone. As Jack looked around at the warriors, the two Apache women, and the land that had been his home for so long, he realized something. He wasn't just choosing between two paths. He was choosing who he was going to become. The rider's words echoed in his mind. "You don't have to be a hero, Jack. You just have to be willing to fight for what's right." Jack turned to the tall woman. "I'm ready," he said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty that still churned in his gut. She nodded, her eyes softening slightly. "Then we fight." The warriors mounted their horses, ready for whatever lay ahead. Jack did the same, feeling the weight of his decision settle in. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a part of something bigger. He was a part of this fight. As they rode out of the clearing, the tall woman rode beside him. "The choice you've made will echo through the lands, Jack," she said. "It's not just about us anymore. It's about the future of everything we've fought for." Jack nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for a future, for a legacy that was bigger than any one person. The warriors moved with precision, their horses galloping in unison as they left the clearing behind them. Jack could feel the land around them shifting, the air thick with the promise of what was to come. As they approached the border of Apache territory, Jack's heart pounded in his chest. This was where the path would split, where he would face the true challenge of his choice. He could feel the tension in the air, like a storm about to break. The warriors were prepared for anything, but Jack knew that the real battle was not just ahead of them. It was within him. As they reached the edge of the territory, the tall woman pulled her horse to a stop. Jack followed suit, his mind focused. She turned to him, her face serious. "This is where we make our stand," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of tradition. Jack looked around at the warriors, each one ready, their eyes filled with determination. He could see it now. Their commitment, their loyalty, their resolve. He was one of them now. "Let's do this," Jack said, his voice steady as he took a deep breath. The warriors surged forward, and Jack followed, ready to face whatever came next. The prophecy had led him here, but it was up to him to decide how it would end. With every step, Jack knew that his life would never be the same again. The path he had chosen was not an easy one, but it was his. And for the first time, he felt ready to walk it. The warriors rode through the morning mist, their presence a steady rhythm against the landscape, the horses' hooves pounding softly on the earth. Jack rode at the front, his thoughts focused, his grip tight on the reins. The path ahead was uncertain, but he could feel the weight of his decision on his shoulders with each passing mile. The prophecy, the stone, the fight for the future, all of it had brought him here. And now, it was time to see it through. As they neared the final stretch of their journey, Jack could feel the tension building. The warriors were ready, their faces grim, their eyes sharp with focus. He could sense their commitment to the cause, their loyalty to him, and to the Apache people. This was no longer just about a rancher who wanted peace. This was about survival. This was about preserving the future. The tall Apache woman, who had guided him through so much, rode up alongside him. Her eyes were steady, unwavering. "You've chosen your path, Jack," she said quietly. "Now you must walk it, no matter what lies ahead." Jack nodded, the gravity of her words settling in his chest. He was no longer the man he once was. He had become something more, something tied to the land, to the people, to the prophecy. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. As they reached the edge of the battleground, Jack could see them. The enemy, the ones who had been hunting the stone, had set up camp in the distance. They were well prepared, their numbers large, their weapons ready. Jack could feel his heart race. This was it. There was no turning back now. The leader of the warriors raised his hand, signaling for the group to halt. The warriors dismounted swiftly, their movements practiced and efficient. Jack followed suit, his mind clear. He wasn't just here to fight for himself anymore. He was here to protect everything he had come to care about. The tall woman stepped forward, her eyes scanning the enemy camp. "They want the stone," she said, "and they will stop at nothing to get it. We must stand our ground, Jack. If we don't, everything we've fought for will be lost." Jack nodded again, feeling the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. He had made the choice. And now, it was time to act. The battle that followed was fierce and chaotic, the sound of clashing weapons and shouting filling the air. Jack fought with everything he had, his body moving on instinct as he defended the warriors by his side. The stone in his pocket seemed to hum with energy, as if it were guiding him, pushing him forward. The enemy was strong, but they were no match for the unity and determination of the Apache warriors. Jack fought alongside them, his movements becoming more fluid, more precise. The prophecy, the stone, the power of the land, it all came together in that moment. As the battle raged on, Jack found himself face to face with the leader of the enemy forces. The man was tall, his face hardened with years of war, his eyes filled with hatred. "You don't belong here," the man spat, his voice low and threatening. "This land is ours for the taking. The stone will be mine, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Jack stood tall, his grip tight on his weapon. "This land doesn't belong to anyone," he said, his voice steady. "It belongs to the people who protect it, and I'm not letting you take it." With a swift motion, Jack lunged forward, his weapon meeting the enemy leaders in a clash of steel. The fight was brutal, but Jack's resolve was unshakable. In the end, it was Jack who stood victorious, the enemy leader lying defeated at his feet. The warriors let out a triumphant roar, their strength and unity carrying them through to the end. Jack stood over the fallen leader, his chest heaving with exhaustion. He looked around at the warriors, the two Apache women, and the land that had once been his home. It was no longer just his. It belonged to them all. And in that moment, Jack realized something. The choice he had made had not just changed his life, it had changed the future. As the dust settled, the warriors gathered around Jack, their eyes filled with respect. The tall woman walked up to him, her face softening. "You did it," she said. "You protected us. You protected the future." Jack looked down at the stone in his pocket, its power still humming quietly. He had done it. The future was safe, and the prophecy had been fulfilled. But Jack knew that this was just the beginning. There would always be more battles to fight, more challenges to face. But now he was ready, and with the warriors by his side, he knew he could face whatever came next. The world had changed, and so had Jack. But in that change, he had found his place, his purpose. And for the first time, he knew exactly who he was meant to be.